So last night I finished Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. And a small voice in my brain is telling me that in order to be fair to this book, I should probably leave it time to settle, think about it, mature in my brain. But I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that because, to be honest, a large portion of this substantial book, I wasn't really enjoying the reading experience. I actually felt a bit resentful of the fact that I was reading it. I was dedicating a lot of time in these 350 or odd pages that I could have been spending on books that I feel are more deserving. So having now finished it, I want to review it. I want to get it out of my system. I want to move on to some of those other books. Now, from that you can tell that I didn't love this book. Overall, I'm not going to be able to discuss this book without discussing the other ones. It is a number 3. And right now, I'm going to say that number 1 was a good book. I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was really smart, really clever the way it used Russian background rather than a sort of generic Western one. The main character was... She is a bit basic, but it works in context of having been an orphan, being in the army, plucked out of everything she knows, and the book was a good size. I enjoyed the reading experience. If I could go back to and advise previous Deb on what to do with this, I would say stop at the back. It's a wonderful book in its own right. With a very little bit of modification, this could be a perfect novel. It didn't need to be a trilogy. I suspect that the only reason it's a trilogy is because these days publishers seem totally incapable of actually publishing a book. It has to be an epic, a trilogy, a journey, whatever. This is a good novel. However, once it becomes a trilogy, it loses a lot of the beauty that this has. For a start, number 2 and number 3 have virtually no Russian influence at all, except that what we already know from the original Shadow and Bone. Because we know it is, we sort of fill in the dots, but it's not there anymore. You get a Russian word thrown in every few chapters or pages to remind you of this, but in no other way do you really have a lot. And there's a lot of other things. Anyway, I enjoyed number 3 more than I enjoyed number 2, but considerably less than I enjoyed number 1. I didn't feel that there was anything happened in this book that was so necessary to my life that I couldn't have stopped at number 1. And I feel this book needed probably at least this much editing. It is fast-paced, in that something is always happening. Oh yes, I'll mention that before anything else so I don't forget it. Fast-paced books are good if that's what you're going for. But pacing is really, really important. If you're constantly slamming your reader with a pace that never, ever stops, it stops feeling fast-paced. It's like if something hits you repeatedly, you start to become immune to the blows. And then you bruise, but never mind. I'm bruised. I'm bruised by this book. But I also lost interest in it because it never stopped. And for one example, this is going to be a very, very spoiler-heavy review, probably. Alina and her friends escape from the caves, and then they're bombed by the Darkling, and they make it to the surface. And then they're running through the woods, and they're camping, and they're cold, and they're hungry, and they don't have enough food, and they're being chased. And then they're being chased by rebels, and they're captured by outlaws. And then they go into a flying machine with Prince Nikolai, and then they arrive at his hideout. What do you want after all that? Good night's sleep? Maybe a hot bath? Hell, even a drink and something to eat because they haven't had any. What do our heroes want? Mel goes, oh, well, I'll go and arrange that tour into the north. And someone goes, what a great idea. I'll go and arrange the fighting. And it's like, no, guys. No, you should be collapsing right now. You should be sleeping for 48 hours. I don't think there's so much as had a nap. Not a glass of water, not a crust of bread. This is not good pacing, Leigh. It just isn't. That is not pacing. Anyway, so yes, I am going to be pretty critical. You've noticed that already. It's not that this is a bad young adult book. It's a good concept and not terribly written. I know many people loved it. I suspect they were very young teenagers mostly, and I'm not saying that they were wrong. What I am saying is that just because a book is aimed at a young adult audience, written for teenagers, probably by a very young author who at times one feels doesn't have that much life experience of many of the things she's writing about, just because of all this, it doesn't need to be poorly written as well. And this book is often patchy, it's thoroughly bloated, and that has a lot of flaws. So the first part of the book was actually, I think, the best. Come on. No. I didn't mind the ending either. I thought the ending was quite nice. Like the middle book, this one didn't need the extensive page count, really. And a lot of the issues that I had with this book, I think, are because it was bloated beyond necessity. Now, another thing I did enjoy the parallels that are given about the evolution of the Grisha and the story of the Roman Europe, and I'm assuming those parallels are intentional, one being the source for the other. There's a little bit of Grisha mythology and history, and that was good as well. I would have liked more of it, because there's a lot more questions about the powers that result from this trilogy that are never addressed, and I'm not reading any more to find if there's an answer there. I don't think there are. There's a lot of inconsistencies in the way the power is described and used as well, many of which can be a bit glaring to me. But again, this book really isn't very much about the Grisha. It may have Grisha verse written on the cover, and it's like Grisha verse, but it's not really about the Grisha. It's about Alina crushing on 3 guys at the same time, which I'll stop here and say, of the really, really positive reviews that I've read, much like many of the very, very positive reviews about Twilight that I originally read, it's a, which boy are you team for? Are you getting wet panties over Prince Nikolai? Or are you melting inside over the Darkling? No one seems to like Mal much, but which of these is your hot crush for your teenage years? And that seems to be the majority of the appeal of this book. It's not a bad appeal. If you're a teenager, you should be encouraged to watch porn, read this book. Maybe Nikolai will really do it for you. Again, no criticism. I was a teenager once. I also had hormones. I read plenty of books because of hormones. There's worse ones to do that with than these ones. So in the beginning of the book, we've got Alina being kept a virtual captive by a fanatical priesty type who's decided she's a saint. He's called the Apparat. He helped save them all from the Darkling at the end of this particular bloat, and they escaped through a tunnel into caverns underground. But now Alina is virtually a captive of his. There's a huge band of the faithful following the Apparat, who interprets what Saint Alina wants them to do, and she somehow can't take control of the situation for a number of reasons, some of which are good. I didn't like the situation she was in because there were flaws with that I felt could be overcome. But I did like, if you accept those flaws, I liked the way Alina's team came together to escape the control of the fanatic religious guy. And the balance of the storytelling techniques was awkward even here at the beginning, but less so. You have narrative, you've got dialogue, not so much, and it's always accompanied by what our narrator is thinking about the dialogue, so the dialogue becomes secondary to internal thoughts, which never vary very much. There's way too much of us being told stuff by the main character, and too little of the story showing us that stuff. I'm never a fan of the tell not show. But nevertheless, at the beginning, they all come together and you actually have the characters interacting with each other in a nuanced setting to escape religious fanatic guy in his caverns and to get Alina back into her power. And that was good. That was very good, because on the whole, there aren't many points in this book where you get dialogue, and there's not very many points in this book where you have continuous characters interacting to give you a depth of relationship between them. Characters in both of these two books tend to be very much a rotating door of characters. That's hard to remember who they are. They die a lot. Alina then beats herself up over the fact they die a lot, even though she never seemed to have any relationship with them alive. It's weird. Like, for example, on page 210, Nevsky sacrifices himself for her so that she can escape. But who the F is Nevsky? I can't remember that name. I can't remember him even existing. And that's the case with most of the ones that die. Anyway, so back to the inconsistent dialogue. Come on. Back to the inconsistent dialogue. I have a bird with whom I have an inconsistent dialogue. You can probably hear him squawking. The worst of the inconsistent dialogue is between Mel and Alina. Now, I don't mind Mel. I don't mind his responses to Alina. They happen too much and too continuously, and it's boring. But in this last book, the Mel and Alina factor is particularly tedious because the lack of dialogue grates. She's continually miserable about him, and the setup is always the same. She asks him a question. He answers her question courteously. She turns her back on him and doesn't respond to the answer to the question which she asked, but instead we have to read through everything that she's thinking inside of her head, and it's boring, monotonous, and repetitive. And it's never very smart, because I am sorry to say, by the end of book 3, I have to conclude that Alina is outright dumb. Not just a bit stupid because she doesn't have a lot of life experience, just a bit youthful, not just quite mature type dumb, but a full dumbass. Dumpster fire dumbass, and the dumpster is made of magnesium. So, as one can tell, I was liking Alina less and less. Not just the real stupidity of this girl child, but her completely moronic attitude to anything that happens around her, and her toxic attitude to other people, her repetitive poor decision making. She has a lot of supporters who she ignores, and like I said, she self-flagellates when they die, which they do almost inevitably, and usually because of her poor decision making. This book, like the previous one, tries to set her up as a future queen, a wonderful leader, charismatic person, and she is none of these things. She is a hole in the universe, walking around, thinking about boys, 3 boys, and that's pretty much all we ever see her thinking about. We're told she thinks about other things, but we see her thinking about boys. So by chapter 3 already, we experienced one particularly bad example of how stupid she is, in that Fluff Brain has realized that in the same way in book 2, the Darkling could come to her and visit her astrally, she can do the same to him. So she does that for the entire book. And it's a very stupid move, because she never knows how much the Darkling is learning from her. And she never draws any sort of conclusion from the fact that he tends to appear and capture her again and again and again after these little astral projections, but she keeps on doing it. As well as stupid, this is a boring maneuver, because all the encounters, and they continue throughout the book, always have the exact same stuff. There's a bit of innuendo, a bit of smooching. Darkling messes with dumbass's brain. She's regularly lied to in these encounters and has her self-confidence picked up and wiped all over the floor. but that never stops her from going back to be misdirected some more. Later in the book, she makes some really, really poor and very fatal decisions based on these stupid shadow encounters that any 5-year-old reading this book would know are very, very poor idea. Honestly, the girl is stupid as the two planks nailed together. Now, the yearning for Mel and Mel yearning for her also seems juvenile to me. The complete absence of sensible communication between the two is the only way that this 2-book worth of misunderstanding can fly, and it lasts for almost all the second and third books, except the very start of the second book and the very end of the third book. And, well, I don't love it. It may not be completely inconsistent with adolescent behaviour. I found it annoying, but I can see that many adolescents don't. And a lot of the girls who are getting wet panties over Nikolai and the Darkling seem to feel that Mel is completely to blame for this. To me, of the two of them, he seems to be the more adept at the relationship. He keeps trying to communicate, trying to lay out boundaries, trying to explain his position in their relationship. And all little sulky little fluff brain does is obsess over it continuously behind his back. Right, so her knocking his attempts at communication down is stupid. By the time they do start communicating at the end of the book, on an almost adult level at times, by then I didn't care about either of them anymore. I'd lost interest in both of them. I had no interest in their relationship. And so the happy ending really didn't feel particularly happy for me because I didn't care about them. I couldn't care about them. There wasn't enough there that was human to care about, and I'm pretty sure that it wasn't the aim of the author drawing it out for all these 2 books in order to artificially sustaining angsty teenager miscommunication to make me lose interest. I think it was meant to make it a actual excitement at the happy ending and actual breakthrough when they start behaving like humans, but no, didn't work for me. Probably would have when I was 15, definitely would have when I was 13, but that ship has sailed. Okay, another thing that the author did poorly, and I'm starting to feel really bad about saying this so much. The author was a young woman when she wrote this. I think that the first book may have even been her first published book. She's probably improved a lot. But on the other hand, she's a published or acknowledged author. My opinion isn't going to affect her in any big way. And if she's grown as an author, she's probably realized many of the things that I've said. I'm not trying to trash a person, but I am trashing these books, and I'm doing it because they deserve it. So, another thing that I'm going to say was done poorly, and which made me dislike Alina intensely, is that she is the sun summoner. This whole trilogy exists because she has this amazing power to summon light. It's an unusual Grisha power. There's only ever one at a time. There's historic records of there being other ones, but she is the only one. What does she do with this amazing power? Not a lot. She's taken to the school, chip, in book 1, and she's forced by a teacher to learn to control it because she can't. But for all of these 2 books, she has no apparent interest in her own power. She doesn't try to explore its possibilities, expand on its applications, consider what she can do with it. Nope, she just wants to emo around in the forest about 3 boys. And while I was finding books 1 and 2 boring and skim reading at times, it hadn't struck me just how poorly she performs in terms of a sun summoner and someone who's got an amazing power until on page 215 David instructs her to bend light in order to conceal them. And I love that tiny nugget of actual applied science. If there had been more science throughout the book, more real stuff throughout the book, it wouldn't have grated so continuously and boringly. Anyway, David tells her that she needs to bend light around them like water around a rock in a stream. Dumbass's response, of course, is, I don't follow, because she doesn't follow much at all. And that was when I realised that in all these pages and pages of her agonising over Mal, and her own lack of beauty, and the Darkling, and how she isn't as pretty as the other girls, and Prince Nikolai, and her appearance, etc., 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 for 300 pages, not once, and all that time, has she dedicated any thought to her powers and what she can do with them. She's completely disinterested in the one thing that makes this trilogy in any way interested. Her only interest is getting all three, what are they called? All three items that will increase her power. But she hasn't practiced that power at all. Anyway, I'm over this trilogy. I'm glad I've finished it. I really wish that the author had just written one really good book instead of following the fashion of trilogies and ending up with a really disappointing mishmash of teenage girls thirsting after boys. Will I read more of his work? I'm not going to say no. I mean, I'm not going to climb over a barbed wire fence naked to avoid her work in future, which is the case with a few authors. And Sarah J. Maas, I'm looking at you. And Donna Trout, I'm looking at you. I think she's got some great ideas, and I think there's a lot of potential in her writing. I think the very word on the cover here, the Grishaverse, is enough to make me shudder and walk away. But as an author, I don't despise her. I just really didn't like books 2 and 3. Bit of a shame. All 900 odd pages or whatever it was of reading that I could have spared myself. If you're very young, you may well enjoy these books. If you really, really like young adult for the girl-boy crushing thing, you will probably also like them. There's a lot to like in them, but none of it is really adult reading. Anyway, that's enough. Over 20 minutes worth of these books is the most I'm going to give in my life. I'm moving on to something else that has been written by adults for adults.